Welcome, everyone, to the special installment of the Alumni Conversation series. And we're excited you're here and appreciate you spending the next hour with us. And our special guest, who we're going to introduce here momentarily. My name is Jimmy Renfro. I'm the director of the Career Center, which is part of the Division of Student and Academic Affairs, recently had a divisional name change. But I'm also privileged to be partnering with Alumni Relations, who is really the primary driver behind the series, as you've probably seen through the Community Relations website. They do these once a month. And today we're going to focus really more on the themes of career readiness and specifically entrepreneurship. And co-hosting with us today from the Career Center is Nancy Eanes, and from Alumni Relations are both Jennifer Nanny and Hannah Gambrell. And so we appreciate them setting this up and also monitoring the waiting room and the chat and everything. And speaking of chat, and if we would, or as we start anyway, would ask everyone to stay on mute. And I think it's probably, when you came in the room, it was automatic anyway. But, we will have time for questions toward the end, where we do have some questions we came up with on ourselves, and we're going to try to really position this as kind of a conversation, as it states. Make it kind of casual and of course, fun. So if you have something that you want to ask, a burning question or not so burning question, be sure and put that into the chat. And maybe half hour, 40 minutes into the conversation, we'll get into those so we can make sure that everyone's questions are answered. But again, have fun, stay engaged, and I hope you'll make the most of this opportunity, whether you're a student or an alum or a faculty or staff member. One other item to note, again, is that this session is being recorded. This will be available, I believe, Alumni Relations puts it on their YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch this at a later time. But also exciting is we've been in conversation with those who are in charge of Global Entrepreneurship Week, which is also happening right now. And this is going to be one of their, they're going to rebroadcast this as one of their presentations on Friday at 9 a.m. as part of that series of events. So we're really excited about that as well. So we're killing a lot of birds with one stone, I guess, as they say. Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get to it now without further ado, as they say. And we have with us, very privileged to have Rachel Miller, who is a School of Health Professions and PA alumna. And her background, and she's waving there to us. Thank you, Rachel. She is CEO and founder of Bloodscore, which is a virtual lab testing platform delivering do-it-yourself wellness lab test kits to consumers in 46 states. Rachel is a licensed physician assistant with previous roles in clinical practice, medical education, and management consulting. Prior to Bloodscore, Rachel advised the nation's largest hospitals and health systems on clinical operations improvement and post-merger clinical integration with Deloitte Consulting LLP. She also served as the Global Healthcare Chief of Staff for Deloitte Touche Tomatsu Limited. Did I pronounce that correctly? Tomatsu? Okay.
Yes.
I've been practicing that for a while, so.
Sorry.
Good. All right. And then finally, Rachel serves on the Texas Christian University Neely Healthcare MBA Advisory Board, and also serves as a core member of the Medical Innovation District in Fort Worth. Rachel holds a Master of Business Administration from the University of Texas at Austin McComb School of Business and a Master of Physician Assistant Studies from the University of North Texas Health Science Center, where she graduated with top honors. And anyway, Rachel, we very much welcome you and glad that you're here, and we will go ahead and dive into the conversation. So we're ready when you are. Or if you
I'm
are.
ready. Thank
All right.
you
Okay.
for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So first question, if you don't mind me, I'll be looking down here a little bit at the script, is first and foremost, why did you choose the UNT Health Science Center for your PA degree?
Well, I would love to give you a really smart answer. I wanted to go to the best school that had the longest program, that had, I think at the time it was the only program requiring a thesis. But really, I followed a boy. And it all worked out because it turned out to be the best program for me, which we'll get into a little bit more as we kind of talk about my career story. And I also married that boy over Thanksgiving break, actually, first year of PA school. So I was thinking about that because our 16th anniversary is coming up. And
yeah, congratulations.
At this time, 16 years ago, I was, I should have been really focusing on my classes and getting ready for finals coming up, midterms. But instead, I was planning a wedding.
Well, obviously both worked out, so.
Yeah. But it, as I said, we'll get more into it, but
Okay. Yeah.
the program was awesome. And I'm so
Okay.
glad that I went.
Good. Well, and knowing that you chose, the PA school specifically, what were your original career goals when you first started here?
So, also another reason for choosing UNT, it was one of the two, I believe at the time, that would allow you to start a year early. I'm not sure if that's an option. So it's kind of a 3+3 program. And here I am, totally putting my foot in my mouth, because at the time I knew for sure I wanted to be a PA forever, and that was exactly what I wanted to do. And so I was ready to start PA school as soon as I could, before technically graduating from UT Austin. But then it turned out that life took me in different directions, and being a PA only was not my only goal, but luckily it did all work out.
Yeah, well, good. Well, and speaking of which, you've had quite the career journey, to say the least. Quite an impressive background for, I guess, a relatively short career so far. Walk us a little bit through your timeline following graduation and how that kind of all unfolded, if you would.
So after graduating in 2007, back then our PA class was only 26 students. I know it's a lot larger now. My first job was as a surgical PA in New York City, specializing in plastic surgery. I really just wanted to do general surgery. My preceptor, Sam Buchanan, was super inspiring, and I think he's still involved with the school. And the job I could find, I'd never been to New York City. I applied for a job through monster.com and somehow landed this job. It was an excellent position. So I first assisted in plastics, ran the clinic. That happened to be in 08, 09, when our economy collapsed. And so we had fewer patients walking in our doors asking for really expensive cosmetic surgery. And so things slowed down a little bit, and I decided to approach the physician I was working with and ask if we might run a little medical spa. And he said, well, sure, if you want to do that, you can. I'm not really interested in it. And so we started providing injectables and things that are very common in plastic surgery offices and in dermatology offices. And I realized through building and running that business that I had an interest in and a knack for the business side of healthcare. And that was the kind of stuff that was exciting me, kind of thinking about how we could do things better or differently. I was also running the OR that we had in our office suite. And so I was finding ways to get more efficient with what we were ordering, and talking with my husband, who, the reason we were in New York, he was getting his MBA at Columbia University. And so the business conversations were just kind of happening around me with him, with his classmates and his friends. And I was sort of stumbling into business stuff that I had never really been exposed to through my schoolwork and through clinical practice. And I just liked it. And when my husband finished up his studies in New York, we decided to move back to Texas. And I thought, this is a time we're making a transition. Let me see if I can find a business, healthcare kind of combo job. I had no idea what that would be. And so I just started looking at job boards. And of all places, I found a job on Craigslist this time.
Wow.
In Fort Worth. And we were actually living in Dallas because my husband's position was in Dallas. But so we moved there, and then I finally found this job in Fort Worth for a company called Doctors in Training, which you might have heard of, students might have heard of. It is a test prep company for physicians taking their board licensing exams, so the COMLEX or USMLE tests. And so I was one of the first employees. Test prep, very similar to Kaplan or something, where you're, taking difficult information and trying to turn it into something more easy to memorize or understand. And we took a really creative spin on it, adding in creative sketches and music and art. And it's kind of like education meets Bill Nye the Science Guy meets Saturday Night Live and VH1 pop-up video. Like just really fun ways to present medical information. Loved that experience. I went on, my position really grew there from being a production kind of assistant to running the entire production unit. I I still look back at that experience as being kind of my business athletics experience, where I wore a lot of hats and learned a lot about growing and running a business.
Mm-hmm.
And through that opportunity, I built a really big network of physicians.
Okay.
Unique things. They were giving lectures for our program, and they were also asking me questions on the side about, oh, well, you're a PA and you do this business stuff, and I have this happening in my practice. What do you have any ideas about that? And so I started doing what I later learned was consulting, just kind of naturally, and taking on little small side gigs and opportunities for practices doing unique things. And then stumbled upon a bigger opportunity to do that at a larger scale for a hospital in Austin. And at the time,
Mm-hmm.
I was also thinking, maybe this business stuff is really interesting and maybe I should get an MBA. Let's do more graduate school.
Why not? Sure.
Why not? So I started my MBA at the University of Texas in Austin. And while I was doing some side consulting gigs that I'd kind of found on my own, I met a number of colleagues from Deloitte Consulting, which is a big four management consulting firm. I did not know what consulting was when I went to PA school or earlier on in PA practice, but through my husband's work and through exposure in New York, I learned about what consulting was. And part of the reason for getting my MBA was to eventually land a consulting job. But I ended up landing that consulting job in the middle of my first year of my MBA. So kind of met that goal a little earlier and had just a phenomenal experience as a management consultant. I finished my MBA doing it on the weekends, and then I worked as a Deloitte consultant throughout all of that, plus a few more years, so 5 years total. Management consulting is a very traditional business job where you consultants go and meet with the top business leaders
Mm-hmm.
of the largest companies all over the world and advise them on all sorts of problems. My focus was very clinical. Deloitte has a really large healthcare practice with about 30 physicians, over 100 nurses, and one PA.
That was you, right?
Yeah, that was me. And there are a couple more there now, but it was a phenomenal experience. We would travel to hospitals all over the country and advise them on big quality issues or operations improvement concerns or post-merger. Obviously, in the last decade, there have been a lot of mergers between large systems and hospitals. So phenomenal experience, built a huge network that I am still one of my favorite things about my opportunities.
Yeah.
And then had a couple of children while working at Deloitte. Consulting, traditionally you travel a lot. So I was traveling 4 or 5 days a week all over the country, and then that got harder with kids. And I was fortunate to transition into more of an internal role where I served as the Global Healthcare Chief of Staff, which still involves some international travel, but less often. And that was a phenomenal role where I was leading a team, taking a lot of the knowledge that we had developed in the United States with our healthcare improvement work and taking that to the rest of the globe. So phenomenal experience. I couldn't have had a better consulting career and experience, but I had this burning idea.
That's what I wanted to check. And I mean, how did Bloodscore emerge and all this? How did you know this was the opportunity for you?
Yeah. So looking back, I've always been entrepreneurial. The stuff that I was doing in the plastic surgery practice, very entrepreneurial. I'm always thinking of ideas, and that's something that my husband and I enjoy, discussing business ideas and things. And he generally has a lot of holes in them. He's a private equity investor, so that's kind of his job. But anyway, this Bloodscore idea came from experiences as a clinician that I think a lot of students and alums that are hopefully listening in have experienced, where, and even as patients, I think we all know that there are frustrations and struggles in our healthcare system. And as a clinician, a lot of my frustration was around patient education and having time to really talk to patients that needed basic information. And also just feeling like, man, if people could get more information about their health and really understand it in a way that makes sense, I think that they could take better control of their health and be healthier proactively. So that was something that just was always an issue that I was focused on as a clinician. And then I had a health issue myself about a decade ago. I know we've got a clinical audience, so I had a TIA, a transient ischemic attack, or a mini stroke. Unexpectedly, I was super healthy at the time, 27, and running marathons and doing all these things that I thought were healthy. But it turned out I had something going on with my health that I didn't know about. And so that was kind of something in the back of my mind as well, as I was thinking of this. Like, I really needed to track some biomarkers to make sure that my health was on track. And as a clinician, I could order those tests for myself, and I could access them in a way that typical people couldn't do. But it was still expensive, and it was still a pain to go get those lab tests. And I knew that surely it could be easier. So I really started Bloodscore for myself. And on the side, I was, just testing my own blood and doing it in a simpler way, but wanting to do that for other people. And so it kind of started as a passion project. But it also was one of those things that I knew would serve a really large market of people that needed lab tests, but just couldn't access them easily or in an affordable way. And then as a consultant, seeing it kind of from the other side of, costs of care and costs of lab testing, and knowing that so many decisions hinge on good information, it felt like from all different angles, things were coming together. And then importantly, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I was at a point in my life where I'd worked for a while and I had savings and I had, children that I wanted to spend more time with or have more flexibility to spend time with. And the timing worked that I could at least try to focus on launching it at a larger scale. Without putting, too much at risk. Right.
Well, like they say, there's no such thing as luck, right? It's a lot of hard work and preparation meets maybe just the right opportunity.
Yeah.
And it sounds like things really, almost kind of a serendipitous moment, came together for you after all those years and years and years of experience and preparation and training.
Yes.
So, great. Well, I know you had also shared this similar journey with some of our HSC students in a GSBS Special Topics course. And, as most of us know, entrepreneurship courses and topics are not typically included in all medical education programs. So courses like this that you've been involved with and students pursuing degrees may be more on the health professions and medical side versus the more, again, business, or maybe those that are maybe geared more toward the entrepreneurial mindset and discovery and taking things to market. Why do you think these are important, even for health profession students, to maybe get this exposure and to learn about entrepreneur mindset and opportunities?
Well, so for a couple of reasons. I think, number one, when you look at going to graduate school or you choose a graduate school, I think graduate school should be all about opening up doors and opportunity. And so I think that, even really technical programs like medical school or PA school or pharmacy school, like they're very focused for a reason, because there's so much information to learn. But I don't want people to feel like they can only do the very narrow thing that they might be training to do. So I think the exposure is important, because your career is long and there are going to be all kinds of different things that come your way, opportunities or challenges or things that you're exposed to along the way. And so I think it's important to plant the seeds early in case there's just something that might open up an idea or a new pathway for someone that they were not expecting. And then secondly, I think that, through my career experience and exposure to a lot of leaders in the healthcare industry, whether in the hospital setting or in a pharmaceutical industry setting, the diverse industry, I've seen, and of course there are exceptions, that healthcare leaders, clinicians, make the best healthcare leaders because they're leading, oftentimes really challenging, leading during really challenging times, like now, the pandemic. But for example, a hospital leader, your job, among a lot of other things, is to lead champion change, right? With clinical leaders. And I think that a clinician, all sorts of clinicians deserve a seat at an executive table. And I've seen a lot of success in organizations that do include clinical voices at that table. So I think it's important to, whether, I think the entrepreneurial seed can grow in a lot of different directions, whether it's
sure.
To a startup company that's maybe healthcare related, or maybe it's just kind of thinking beyond the clinical practice and what else can I do with this.
Okay. Well, you've talked an awful lot about planting that seed and your influences and leadership and all those things that are certainly vital for all of us as we develop our different directions. Has there been any particular, say, a fellow HSC alum or a faculty member, whether while it was you were here, maybe early on or even afterwards, that you think has really been sort of your biggest inspiration?
I've been exposed to just so many people throughout my schooling and throughout my career that I really look up to and that I've continued to keep as mentors. I think when I look at UNT, and even in the times before Dr. Williams was there, it's always been such an entrepreneurial kind of a go-get-em kind of environment. I think that comes from being a smaller school. Look at what they've done over the last few years, launching an MD program when there were tons of obstacles in the way. So I think, as we opened up this conversation, when I said, I wish I could say that I specifically chose UNT for a reason, that propelled my career on purpose. Maybe it was by accident, but I look back and I think, man, the things that we learned and the exposures that we had to people who just solved their own problems,
right,
and did it in a creative way, I think has really inspired so many different moves in my career.
Okay. Now, I'm shifting gears just a little bit here. We do have some questions coming into the chat, so in a few minutes we'll get back to those. But one of the things we in the Career Center, and this is, I think, something that most, academic problems, certainly, it's not just about the technical knowledge. That's a big part of it. You have to have the academic background and that solid technical knowledge and skill in any form of whether it's being a healthcare provider or biomedical scientist, public health specialist, and all those things. That base knowledge is really the key to being successful. But a few things that we also talk a lot about, it has various names. We call them career readiness skills. Some people call them marketable skills, and I think sometimes are inappropriately or maybe undersold as soft skills, meaning that maybe they're not quite as critical, which we believe they are. And two in particular come to mind that I think are especially, there's just probably a heightened sense of awareness, especially this year. Number one is resiliency, for obvious reasons, which we talk about as the ability to persevere despite, adverse, or despite adversity, and the ability to bounce back. And the second one being intercultural fluency, which is obviously understanding and appreciating diverse backgrounds and cultures. So looking at those two things, because I know that's kind of come to light a little bit about just being resilient and having that drive and determination. But number one, how important has resilience been in your experience?
And I think, any student or alum listening in would agree. The challenges start from before you're even admitted into these programs, right? So I think we're all maybe a little bit, gluttons for punishment, maybe. And I think, entrepreneurs talk about that a lot, but I think, healthcare providers, they get that, from the very beginning. And that's been huge for me as a clinician. There were challenges along the way every day. And as an entrepreneur, it's the same. So, I think that's huge. And I think that it's practiced, I think it, luckily those are really, you call them maybe soft skills, but I think they're really hardcore skills. I mean, like being resilient is really everything as a clinician and as an entrepreneur. So if you're a clinician who decides to be an entrepreneur, you must really be looking for some punishment because it's there. However, nobody has thrown up, well, except for my children, nobody's thrown up on me lately. There's still a lot of bleeding, but it's like, business bleeding that must stop and less, human bleeding. But I certainly approach problems in business in much the same way that I approach problems with patients.
Okay.
And then intercultural fluency you mentioned.
Yes.
Yes, super important. And I think also, luckily for clinicians, you're already getting a lot of practice at that, even if it's not intercultural fluency in the way that it might traditionally be thought of. You are communicating and working among different cultures, whether they're people from different countries or backgrounds, or you're working among different clinicians with different perspectives, right, or different roles. And so I kind of see both of those as really kind of the same thing in a lot of ways. And I've been challenged to practice that skill as a clinician, of course, but then through my career and having a global role,
sure,
had that opportunity on a daily basis. I had a boss that was in Australia, and one in London, and one in New York. And then I had a team that was mostly in India. And then we were, deploying work all over the globe. And so the exposure was, something I could never have anticipated doing in my life. And I actually thought multiple times of our professionalism course from PA school, because we talked about these things early on from a patient care perspective. And I was still kind of utilizing a lot of those skills in the business setting. And I think the thing that has helped me most, whether interculturally or with interprofessions or with clinicians and business people sitting at the same table trying to make the same decision, is relating to people on a personal level and learning about them and listening more than I'm talking, which I'm not doing a good example of right now. But those things have always been important, and getting to know people as people and being a little bit vulnerable yourself is helpful, I think, in, negotiating, a patient relationship, a business relationship, or a leadership kind of relationship.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, looking at the chat, it's almost 30 minutes past the hour. The questions are streaming in as expected. So we just want to make sure we get to these. And then if we have some that maybe we haven't gotten to through our interview, then we'll maybe come back and circle back to those toward the end. So if that works for you, I'll kind of go back up here and read some of these questions. Some of them you've at least partially answered, but I think, inquiring minds want to know. And so there's a lot more that they would like you to kind of dig into here. So the first one asks, can you tell us a little bit more about Bloodscore? I read it's in 48 states. How many employees are there? Have you experienced company challenges during COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes. Okay, so Bloodscore, a little more of the basics. We provide do-it-yourself at-home lab test kits for just basic wellness labs. So we have a profile that's a basic wellness profile that's a full lipid panel, hemoglobin A1C, and inflammatory marker C-reactive protein. And from that, we calculate a blood score from 0 to 100. That's just an easy overall wellness score that helps you gauge your progress as you try to improve your health. We also give people directly to the people, not through a provider, all of their wellness lab metrics that doctors and patients are used to seeing, the milligrams per deciliter of each measurement. And then we go on to explain what everything means. And it's all in this color-coded, easy to understand lab report. It's not the black and white thing that you see coming from your typical lab. All of that's on a private dashboard. It's interactive. So people are, clicking on their different lab metrics and then looking for more information, and it pops up information that's most valuable to them and makes recommendations on lifestyle improvement, modifications, diet, exercise, that kind of thing. And also helps to connect them with a provider if they need one, if they need more help. We also offer a couple of other panels, a thyroid panel and a vitamin D panel. We have a lot of other potential profiles in the works. We're really conservative about what we offer compared to a lot of other do-it-yourself, direct-to-consumer lab testing companies. I think that's just the clinician leadership and wanting to be really conservative about what we provide people. We sell through a few different channels, direct-to-consumer being one, but also through gyms and wellness groups, and also through providers that are looking to provide easier access to their patients for wellness lab tests and education while not having to themselves provide all of the education. So that's kind of where we're mostly getting our business. The pandemic has changed things more than I anticipated, or maybe differently than I anticipated. We've been getting a lot of transition in our channel from where we used to sell through a lot of gyms and wellness groups. A lot of those closed, at least temporarily, or shifted to just offering, fewer additional programs, kind of offering the basics, right? And we're getting a lot more inquiry from larger provider groups, which is great, but has, it's a different challenge, and it's a different customer to serve. We've also had a lot of volume issues with our labs, because a lot of the labs are focused on COVID testing, and there's less of a priority placed on wellness lab testing. So there have been a lot of challenges and some surprises along the way, but that's par for the course in a startup.
And how many employees did you say you had? I didn't catch that.
So we're really small. So as far as full-time employees, we have 3 full-time, and then we contract with a lot of groups. And so it kind of depends on the customer that we're serving. A lot of the roles that our people in-house do are done out, specifically within that provider group. So lab review, that kind of thing, for the most part, happens outside of technically Bloodscore.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then next question is, you're quite an accomplished entrepreneur and also mentioned having a spouse and kids. How do you maintain your work-life balance?
Oh, it's all out of balance all the time. So I think, I talk about this with other people, and I read about it a lot, and I think about it a lot. So I chose to be a PA because I wanted to be a mom. I knew that. And I knew I wanted to have some version of work-life balance. And it's impossible. And you can never do everything all at the same time. I think, you hear you can do anything, women can do anything. But I think, and absolutely that's true, but it's just not all at the same time. Mm-hmm. I'll say, my kids are 6 and 3, so life is busy. My husband travels almost all of the time. That stopped for a little while in the pandemic, and he has been, working from home, which has been strange, for just a life change. Mm-hmm. But normally he's gone. So mostly I act like a, single parent, trying to make sure the kids get to school and get picked up from school and work during the day. And, so it takes a lot of hands, a lot of help. Some weeks look really different from others. And so I think that not doing everything at the same time mentality, I take that kind of every day. So sure. every week I'm not superstar CEO, and every week I'm not superstar mom. It's just, I plan ahead a lot. I work at night a lot. That's another thing that changed with the pandemic. I felt like I went totally back to day one of startup time, where I was only working at night on the weekends. And that happened again when the kids were home, and I needed to be the kindergarten Zoom teacher at home, and also run a little preschool on the side and cook every meal because we weren't going anywhere, ordering anything in. And, it was a lot.
That's all right. Yeah. No big deal.
Yeah. Well, we all did that, right? Everybody's lives have changed. And so, it's about managing expectations of yourself. Sure. and what can be produced.
Okay. What would you say has been your peak experience so far as the leader of Bloodscore?
Man, this sounds like the smallest thing. It doesn't come down to making money. It doesn't come down to actually doing any of the work I was trying to do. The best experience was just the day that we turned the website on because it was so painful to produce it. And that was kind of the day one of saying, okay, this product is commercially available. Because it was available to people kind of in a beta testing sort of way, but they weren't accessing a website, and it wasn't this cohesive, scalable thing. And that took a solid year to build and launch. And of course we tweak it every day, but that day I felt like even if I never sell a single test kit, if this thing totally implodes, I at least did what I set out to do and overcame a lot of obstacles along the way and learned a lot. But I know that I accomplished a really challenging goal that a lot of people set out to accomplish in a startup and never actually get there to launch day.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And this next one you've kind of addressed, but I think it takes it a step further. And that question is, how would you encourage students with an entrepreneurial curiosity to nurture and / educate themselves in that direction?
Yeah, I would say explore it now. I know you're busy as a student. I remember those days really well. And you feel like there's no possible way you could do one more thing in a given day. But in the same way that I was kind of talking about my day-to-day life, where one week looks different from the other, so does yours. And so some weeks are a little lighter. And I would use this time to have conversations with people that you're curious about. Maybe I'm one of them, or somebody that you've run across in the industry, and ask them about their job. Have a Zoom call, take them to coffee. It depends on the timing here, right? But learn, have those interactions now. Number one, they build your network too. These are people that will remain your colleagues and potentially become a mentor as your career progresses. But it's not any easier ever to have a conversation with someone that you're curious about than when you're a student. Because professionals are very accommodating to conversations and to that kind of teaching, mentorship sort of conversation when you're a student, and less so when you're a professional. Not to say that people don't accommodate those meetings, but it's different when you're a student.
Sure.
And there are clubs at UNT. I know there's a commercialization and entrepreneurship club. Join that. Even if you can't make all of the meetings, or you feel like you're not really going to do it full out, just participate. Go to other courses. Dr. McLean's course that's for the GSBS students. See if you can audit a class or two if it's of interest. And now there are probably recorded classes more than maybe there might have been before. So, use all of the resources that are right at your fingertips and develop the relationships now, even if you're not sure what it is you might want to do later. And then also, I have to give a little plug to TCU's business school. There's a healthcare MBA, down the street, and not that many clinical students have time to add on an MBA or have, just the desire right now. But think about that. Maybe there are people involved with the healthcare MBA that might be of interest to you. Maybe they're actually talking about coming up with some smaller, survey courses and certificate programs. There might be something there for you. And this could be a good time to do it.
Okay. Thank you for that. Next question is, how much practice experience would you recommend before someone starts off on the entrepreneurial track? And then secondly, could you have done what you have done without that experience?
So, I think that's that depends kind of question. So I talk to a lot of clinicians actually that are thinking about transitioning out of clinical practice and into something else. And that's just something that has happened over the years. So working at Deloitte, I was interacting with a large team of clinicians doing something different from clinical work, right, as consultants. But then we would go to hospitals and we would meet with clinicians all the time as we're trying to improve quality metrics or operational issues. And they're, always dumbfounded to hear, oh, wait, you're a PA and you're doing this business thing? How'd you get into that? Or I want to do that. And so those conversations have become really common for me. And I would say a few things. Whether you want to be an entrepreneur or you want to teach or do research or go into sales or go work as a consultant or an entrepreneur, whatever it is. So many different things that you might do with your technical background. I highly recommend practicing first for at least 2 years, maybe longer if you're not sure what you really want to do. I think, PAs in particular, I know we have a lot of PAs on this call. One of the best parts about being a PA is that you can practice in different subspecialties without having to go back to school or get a fellowship. So practice in a couple of different areas. That experience will serve you and gives you credibility in whatever it is that you do. I could not have been a successful consultant had I not, or as successful of a consultant had I not practiced at all. Because there are certain conversations and there's a way that you can relate to other clinicians. If you can say, yeah, I've been in your shoes. I understand But when we come in and tell you that we want you to use this instrument because everybody else is using it and you're used to using this other instrument for your surgeries, that you don't want to make a change. And I understand that. And, and here's the information, it's a different conversation if you can say that you've at least somewhat been in their shoes versus just coming in and having a conversation without any sort of experience that can relate to the other person. So that's super valuable, and it's something that you'll never get a chance to do if you don't do it from the beginning, right? It would be really hard to go launch a startup or go work in a business setting for a decade and then say, I think I'm going to go into clinical practice now. That would be a challenging transition, right? So my recommendation is go into clinical practice like you've been planning to do, maybe do something on the side. I actually have a few of my classmates who are running side gigs. That's a kind of common term now, that might be making more money than their full-time PA gig. So, there are things that you can do at the same time, or maybe projects that you could take on in the hospital that you're working at that kind of help you do some of the business stuff or some of the, just kind of work that other part of your brain that you're interested in working while you're still practicing clinically.
Okay. Yeah, I think the technical term for that is side hustle. I believe I have vernacular correct, right? But it's amazing that they can make as much, if not more, than they may be making on their PA salary with that side opportunity, as we may call it. So yeah, it sounds like there's a lot out there that if you just find the right niche and get yourself in that right groove, then lots of additional money can be made with the right opportunity. A couple of other questions here that have just come in. The first one's a multi-part, so I'll read the first part, which says, with the clinician and consultant background, where do you believe the greatest gaps exist in public health and delivery of healthcare?
Yeah.
And I think this is prefaced. Let me read the rest real quickly, excuse me. But it says, prior to entering PA school, I worked as an account manager for a telemedicine company serving large multinational clients in the private sector. There's a significant amount of money being invested to solve for the 20% of employees driving 80 to 90% of healthcare costs. So the first part, again, is where you believe you see the greatest gaps between public health and delivery of healthcare. And then I'll go on with the second part of that question.
So I look at this kind of from a bit of a different perspective, probably, having worked in health systems around the world. So we talk a lot about how terrible the United States health system is, but I will say that it is one of the best in the world, if not the best. It does have its challenges. Lots of challenges. And that's part of why I launched Bloodscore, was because I was so frustrated with the challenges that I wanted to do something to make an aspect of our health system better, even if, wellness lab testing is not going to solve all the problems. But I think that it's close to where the problems are. And I think it's access and information restriction. So, we don't have good access to preventative care. We don't know what we should be doing. We go out and we spend billions, trillions maybe of dollars on, supplements and gyms and all kinds of stuff that we think helps improve our health, but we have no idea if it actually does, right? We have no way to measure that until Bloodscore. I'm just kidding. But we need to be checking in on our health in a way that informs our decisions, right? Instead of just guessing. And so, I think that's a big issue, and we can't be performing at our best, whether, as people and then as clinicians, giving the best healthcare if we don't have the basics right. And so I think it starts at the basics, and I've seen that in other countries. Other countries do aspects of where our health system has gaps. They might do it a lot better. And we all have a lot that we can learn from each other.
Yeah. Which is a great segue, because the second part of that question goes on to ask, are you seeing major strides being made by a specific industry or country and addressing that specific thing in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different groups, whether it's industries. So you can almost look at some of the self-employed or self-insured companies in the United States that are trying to take care of their own employees and manage their health themselves, the larger corporations. They're doing it similarly to how some of the other countries that are maybe doing some of that preventative care better are doing it. They have a set budget, they have a set population, and they really take care of that population start to finish, the full value chain, right? So I think that's where the success is, but it's, again, it comes from so many different angles. You know, there are so many different players and moving parts that it's impossible to pinpoint, you know, who's doing all of it right? Nobody. And even who's doing certain pieces of it right, it's hard to pinpoint.
Okay, thank you. And now you would have to know that this question comes from the Dean of the School of Health Professions. This one asks about, of all the books on your shelf, whether they're in the background or not, but what book or books would you say are must-haves for an entrepreneur? If you haven't read.
You know what I actually have enjoyed so much lately, and this is not a book, this is a podcast, but the How I Built This podcast by Guy Raz. It's an NPR podcast. Super inspiring and very real life stories of companies you've heard of. And I think that that's really fun to listen to while I'm like driving or exercising or something. So I would recommend that, because I know you've got busy students reading a ton, but listen to it when you're walking around if you ever get to go to campus in the near term. I think that gives you an insight into kind of how entrepreneurs are thinking and what sorts of challenges that they are exposed to. And then it kind of depends on what sort of, and also there's the UNT Innovates podcast. If you haven't listened to that, listen to that one, because that podcast that Cameron Cushman runs or he hosts is an awesome way to meet some local entrepreneurs that you might want to reach out to and learn more about what they're doing. That one's really fun. And as far as the books go, oh my gosh, there are so many, and business books just in general, and books about, you know, personality strengths and leadership capabilities. I can give you a big list that I think every graduate student should be reading. But start with that podcast and see if you come away from those stories feeling like, oh, that's the kind of energy, you know, I feel that person's energy and I want to do that with my life. Or do you find that stressful and demotivating? I think that would be a good start for someone dipping their toes.
Okay. Thank you for that. This next question asks, with Bloodscore providing services nationally, you're also are faced with competing against other large national competitors such as Everlywell, based in Austin. Don't know if that rings a bell or not. But how do you differentiate yourself and stand out in the market?
Yeah, so Everlywell is huge, and they have a huge capture on the market, and they're doing excellent things. They're providing tons of tests. You know, pretty much any lab test you could think of, you can access. Where we differentiate is we've really become more of a technology company than a marketing company. So where we spend most of our time and resources is now, and this has been kind of a transition that somewhat began before the pandemic and has been certainly thereafter. We're building customized platforms for larger provider groups that want to deploy lots of tests to lots of patients. And so we've become more of an education channel and a customization. It's customized education and a way for clinicians to communicate with their patients in a new way, and educate them in a new way and triage them without them coming into the office as much. So, you know, that was not our intent when we launched. I knew that there were a couple of different channels that we would pursue. We had really easy entry into kind of the wellness and fitness groups that I mentioned earlier. And it's been harder to penetrate the provider market just because there are more decision makers and they're slower to make changes and make moves. But the pandemic has kind of forced some of the issues. So, where we're seeing telemedicine popping up everywhere, virtual lab testing is also kind of an easy addition. And it's helping providers continue to do wellness checks and annual visits without necessarily having people in the office.
Okay. Well, you brought something up interesting. I mean, obviously the pandemic has changed so much of the way any of us are doing things, whether it's in the entrepreneur world or the education world or the healthcare providing world. And probably the word of the year, I would guess, for 2020 is pivot. And I almost cringe when I hear that word, but it's the reality, right? Yeah. And it sounds like from what you've told us, whether it's because of the pandemic or other forces in the market, that you have to be very flexible, very fluid, very elastic. How true is that, pandemic or not, that level of being able to turn and pivot on kind of a moment's notice, depending on what's happening?
I meant to add that in when you asked about resiliency and cultural fluency. I think flexibility and adaptability are right there with resilience. And as I look back on my career, actually a boss at one point said, gosh, Rachel, you seem to, of all the people that I've worked with, you seem to like change the best and really just go with it. And I'm sitting there internally thinking, I hate change. Yeah. Like change is scary. What are you talking about, And I think that, but as I thought about it later and as I've continued to think about that conversation, it's that he perceived that I was okay with change and that I was adaptable and that I could be thrown into something unexpected and it would be okay. And I think that as clinicians, we become really practiced at that because you don't know what's going to be on the other side of that door when you walk in, and you have to flex, not just your knowledge and your brain, but the way that you interact with that person and that challenge. And I think the pandemic is giving all of us a good lesson in adaptability and flexibility. And I think it's right up there with the hardcore soft skills that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. I appreciate you asking or adding on to my add-on to the question. That's the end of our submitted questions. What I wanted to do, since we have about 5 minutes, is encourage the audience to continue. If there's something that hasn't been addressed, to please put that in the chat, or at the same time, to our partners from Alumni Relations, Hannah, Jennifer, or Nancy from Career Center, if there are any additional questions that maybe were missed or that you would like to also interject there. If not, I'll give it just a couple of minutes, and we do have a couple of concluding questions here that we had originally planned. So just again, wanted to encourage anyone else to put a question in there if it has not been addressed yet. And then we'll start to wrap up here in just a couple of minutes.
Thanks, Jimmy. From the Alumni Relations end, we have gone through all of the questions that we had kind of submitted ahead of time, and then we've gone through the current chat. So like you said, give another minute or so if anyone has any last minute thoughts, and if not, we will wrap up in the next few minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. I'm going to continue looking at the chat, and I'm going to count to about 10 in my head here, just to make sure in case anyone's typing. We have, they always say when you're giving a presentation, when you ask a question, count to 8 to 10 in your head, which seems like an eternity, but it's really not. I wanted to make sure we had plenty of opportunity for those last questions.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
I'm America McGuffey, and I'm faculty here, and I'm an alum of the program as well. And if nothing else, I just wanted to thank you for doing this chat. I think it's so important that we hear that, but that the students who are here hear it. And I think that they will share that information with others and kind of spark that other areas of interest that they each come in with. And so I just really enjoyed every minute of the time that I was here, and I want to thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure, and it's nice to virtually meet you. No, I'm passionate about sharing my story and talking with students. So if there are students or groups of students who want to talk more, Jimmy, you're welcome to share my information, and we can continue conversations and stay in touch.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I also live within walking distance from the school, so I'm easy to find.
Okay. If there are no other comments or questions, I still don't see anything new to the chat. I'll end it on this one. Maybe it'll spark one more, but we do have a couple of minutes. Is if you have any sort of profound parting general advice to students, or anyone for that matter, who are considering jumping into the entrepreneurial world, what would that be?
Do it. Answer. No. So the thing that I talk with a lot of people about is just, you see other technical programs, engineers, for example. My husband's an electrical engineer, and now he does investment stuff. It's really common for so many other technical careers to make transitions and to become leaders in their organizations from all different backgrounds. And in the clinical setting, we see physicians oftentimes become leaders of their organizations, and it's less common for PAs or pharmacists or physical therapists or any of the other clinical specialties to necessarily to have a seat at an executive table. And where I encourage, especially PAs that I talk to, is you deserve a seat at that table, and we are only fully practicing at our team capability when every team member has a voice or a representation. So whether it's being an entrepreneur, again, I think I so closely relate, starting your own company to breaking out of the mold of the thing that you were specifically trained to do. I think that they're really closely related. So if there's something else out there that you want to do, if there's kind of this question that you have about what else could I do, start asking those questions now as a student and explore those opportunities, and don't be scared to try it.
Awesome, Rachel. Thank you. What a great way to wrap things up. And again, we are so honored that you were here. This was fantastic, wonderful dialogue. And at this point, I think we'll hand it back over to Hannah and Jennifer. If you have anything that you would like to wrap up with from the alumni relations perspective, please do so.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel, for being here. Like Jimmy said, it was wonderful and I think really insightful. So thank you to everyone that has joined. If you would like to connect with Rachel directly, you can email the alumni relations team at alumni@unthsc.edu, and we will connect you with her directly. So if you have any thoughts or questions or follow-ups for her, please reach out to us and we will connect you.